The black fog. Everything. All of this chaos and madness all began with the black fog. It was just an ordinary day when the news reported a strange phenomenon, a wispy black cloud of fog, steadily making its way towards the west coast of the country from somewhere over the ocean. Nobody really cared at first. As you'd expect, it wasn't hurting anyone except maybe the sailors and the planes flying over the ocean. But life for everyone else continued as normal. Whenever the news would talk about what we now know as the black fog, people would nod, show a little interest, say something like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," and then be done with it. That is, until the fog hit the coast. Cities on the seaside were first to be hit and covered with the black fog, and the news went crazy. Every station frantically pointing their cameras at the fog to capture footage of this unique event. Personally, it always looked like a thick cloud of smoke to me, instead of a city covered in fog. The news said that nobody from the outside world could contact anybody in the fog. A nationwide panic was beginning, and it grew pretty fast. People who'd previously disregarded it now looked for ways to leave the country, as the news reported that it was heading east and determined to devour the entire country. So with mass hysteria of this magnitude, it can safely be assumed that plenty of doomsday prophets came forward with explanations about the fog's origin. It quickly became obvious to me that these prophets of the apocalypse were nothing more than crazies who walked into the news station from off the street. Nearly every scenario imaginable was told as a reason for the black fog's existence. God's wrath on humanity, the apocalypse, aliens seeking a safe place to land their spacecraft. The black fog was simply fog mixed with pollutants in the air. It was a publicity stunt for a new movie. The government is using the fog for some purpose. Cthulhu is rising. Yeah, we heard everything. But none of it really made sense. So there was a few more days of chaotic news reports, and then the black fog made it to my town. I was walking home that afternoon, turning a street corner to see my 2-story home come into view down the street. Cars breezed past me at a steady pace. Coming toward me down a sidewalk was a mother pushing a baby stroller, with an enthusiastic little boy running ahead of her, cheerfully telling his mommy to hurry up. The grass was bright green in the warm summer atmosphere, and there were only a few white clouds in the sky to distract me from the wild blue yonder above. A red car, the sides splattered with a thick mud, raced past me. The bright yellow orb in the sky beamed down on the world, covering us in beautiful sunlight. But if there's anything I can remember from that day, oh, it was the colors. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, a dark giant stood up over the horizon and loomed over the city, blotting out the sun. Cars stopped in the middle of the road, leading other cars to crash into them. People began to scream. Some hysterical woman's wailing, "It's here! It's here!" As I looked up at the black fog blotting out the sky, it swept over the city rather quickly, shrouding me in a cave of blackness. I stumbled through the fog, unable to even see my hands in front of me. The world around me looked as though it were covered in smoke, but I could breathe it in normally. I could hear people screaming. The sound was quite frightful, and screeching of tires and crunching of metal. In my mind, I could picture the street as it had been before the fog hit. Now, my house was just a few yards down the street. If I could find my way inside, I could just wait the fog out. I mean, it's gonna have to disappear and leave the city. I began walking toward my house, a little uneasily, still hearing people cry out for help. It was as though I'd become blind. So I took my steps with care, and I tripped over a blunt object when I was halfway across the street. I climbed to my feet, my sense of direction disoriented. How close to my house am I? I just gave it my best guess and made my way forward. I had to walk around a parked car and tripping over the curb and falling on the sidewalk. And on the other side of the road, my shoes felt grass. I wasn't entirely sure it was my yard, though. So I worked my way to the front door of the house and sighed in release when I figured out it was my home. I hurried inside quickly, closing the door behind me. The fog hadn't gotten in my house, which I was thankful for. Only a little bit of it got in when I opened the door, but I could still see around the house. But the windows displayed nothing but black. It was as though I was standing in my house at night, a starless, moonless night. I sat down, took a few deep breaths to calm myself, turned on the TV, and began to watch the news. Now, if anything was being done about the black fog, surely they're going to report it on the news. The news anchors were calm, but to my dismay, they had nothing to report. They said the black fog was perfectly natural and explainable. The entire nation was being covered at an unbelievably quick rate, and the president had been evacuated for his own safety. But it's perfectly normal and explainable. I changed the channel right there, cutting off a blonde newswoman mid-sentence. On the next channel, they weren't calling the fog natural. They weren't talking about the president. They weren't pretending this wasn't a national emergency. Instead, they were panicking. People who looked like normal civilians ran around the station in a frenzy, while the camera's view rested on a guy sitting behind the news desk, sitting in the middle of all the chaos. He stammered as he spoke, trying to maintain some sense of order. There were no reports of, rescues from any seaside city, nor did the black fog show any sign of receding, the guy muttered. As I watched, he managed to stop one of the frightened civilians and asked him to say a few things for the camera. Hi, my name is Adam, breathing heavily. That shit out there is crazy, man, like it ain't fog, it's something else. Adam wiped off his sweaty forehead and cleared his throat. We heard rumors that you can see in the black fog if you have a flashlight or fire. We sent a guy out there to get one of those big-ass flashlights, but he hasn't made it back yet. I remained in my living room, in complete disbelief that this was even happening. I barely registered anything the news had said. Not that it said much. The only thing they could talk about was the black fog, and because no one knew anything else to say, there wasn't much going on. I couldn't tell if it was day or night outside by this point. I just tried to sleep according to the clocks in my house. I slept on the hardwood floor in the living room, just too nervous and afraid to climb upstairs to my bedroom. And when I woke up, I turned the TV on again. Inside the news station, there were sleeping people, mixed with people standing off camera, who were in rapid discussion about what to do. It was almost like they forgot the camera was on. So I decided to wait and see if they were going to give any piece of news. I went in the kitchen, fixed myself something to eat. Luckily, I had made a trip to the grocery store the day before. Despite this, my appetite still wavered when I looked at the food. This black fog just didn't seem real to me. It was like a demented nightmare. I just didn't want to think about it. I returned to the living room without eating anything, but I did pick at a few things on the plate, and I sat down on the couch and just blankly stared at the TV, listening to people in the news talk for an hour. This end of the world thing is fucking boring. I turned my head to the living room window and examined it from where I sat. Curiously, I think that Adam guy had said something about being able to see in the black fog with... I jumped off the couch and stumbled over to the hall closet, shuffling through coats and other crazy things. I found it. I found a flashlight. Clicking it on, I sighed in relief when a bright beam of light shot out. It was the first light I'd seen since all this started. I pointed the flashlight towards the living room window and froze when I saw a face outside. There was a man standing outside the window with his thin nose barely touching the glass. His face was horrible, but I couldn't look away. The skin hung loosely on him, making him look like an old man. He had long silver hair on his head, a few strands of which were dangling limply over his face, but also huge bald patches. The worst part of it was, he was smiling at me. He had a wide, toothy grin, but his eyes had black irises and white pupils. Near the bottom of the window, I could see that he was wearing a torn-up white t-shirt. But that smile just hypnotized me, and his eyes were burning into mine. There was no color to the man at all. Even the thin cuts on the side of his face were like an inky black. And there he was, completely unmoving, except for the slightest bit as he breathed. And the light from the flashlight didn't seem to affect him at all. I moved closer to the window and knocked my fist on the glass. The colorless man didn't react. He only stared. I turned the flashlight off, and he disappeared in the fog. I turned the light back on, and he's there, staring. Adam was right. It's possible to see in the black fog with a flashlight. I was intrigued by the colorless man, but I was pretty damn frightened too. How long had he been outside my window? A shiver ran down my spine when I realized he's been watching me sleep. I was unnerved by his endless staring and his amused little smile. As much as I wanted to watch the news in the living room, I found excuses to stay out. I was looking through the same pantry in the kitchen for half an hour. Soon after, I found myself sitting in a chair in my room upstairs. All I could think about was when this fog would lift. But I couldn't stay out of the living room forever. I eventually went back. The first thing I did was flash the light at the window to see if the colorless man was still there. He was. He didn't seem like he moved at all since I first realized he was there. Unsettled, I turned off the flashlight to conserve the batteries. But mostly, I just didn't want to look at him. Tried to make myself comfortable on the couch. I turned my attention to the news where Adam was talking. Things in the black fog are everywhere, because the fog is probably covering the whole world by now. But stay vigilant. A miracle has to happen soon. It seemed that I wasn't the only one who had detected the presence of things in the fog. Adam delivered reports of mutilated bodies found in the streets, with their eyes and their mouths and their teeth in their eye sockets. More of the news. Survivors chimed in behind with more information and told of strange thumps outside safe shelters where people were holed up, waiting for it to end. There was no denying it now. Something unnatural was in the black fog. Maybe something beyond the colorless man outside my window. I decided to sleep upstairs in my bedroom that night. I shined the flashlight at the window before trudging upstairs to see if the colorless man had left. He was still there. Only his eyes had moved to follow me now. Once I got upstairs, I placed the flashlight under my pillow, kneeled next to my bed, and did something that I hadn't done for a very, very long time. I prayed. That night, I dreamed that the light had returned to the world. Families walked down sidewalks. Children shouted to each other as they played. The grass was a dark green and the sky burned blue. The wind was crisp, caressing my cheek as it passed by. I looked around in wonder, and then noticed somebody standing behind me. I spin around to see the colorless man standing there with that same grin. Only this time, there was no glass separating us. I woke up sweating. First thing I saw in my bedroom was the window. Out of curiosity, I took the flashlight from under my pillow and flicked it on. I don't know what I was expecting to be there. I guess part of me thought the colorless man would be floating outside my second floor bedroom window. But it wasn't him. No. It was a woman with pale skin and long black hair. She looked younger than the colorless man. She was probably in her 20s, but she had that same crooked grin, the same vacant eyes, and that unsettling stare. Completely drained of color. I fell off my bed and screamed as the woman stared on. I crawled to my feet and slammed my bedroom door closed as I hurried into the hallway. As soon as it had shut, I noticed another window in the hallway. I flashed the light at it and gasped. A fat, colorless man was in the light, grinning, as though he was laughing at some private joke. I didn't know what to do. Total panic had seized me. I had to flee from the unseen eyes in the black fog. I shined the flashlight at every window I came across. Another colorless woman, a thin, colorless man. I went to the upstairs bathroom, and I managed to reach the stairs and flew down them. I dived into the kitchen where I ducked under the table, and I tried to catch my breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the kitchen window. I didn't want to know, but I still flashed my light at the window. This was the worst one yet. He resembled a wolf with a wide snout, shaggy black fur, and pointed ears. He stared at me with wide, hungry, pupilless white eyes. For a crazy moment, I thought it was a wolf skull, maybe a mask. But then a thick dog tongue slid out of the mouth and licked his chops as he stared at me. There was a colorless person at every window in my house. I stumbled out of the kitchen to get away from the starving eyes of the wolf and found myself standing in the living room. I flicked the flashlight on and pointed it at the window to see that the colorless man was still there, patiently waiting. As I stared, his grin widened and revealed fangs like razors in the back of his mouth, and his eyes flashed red. That was the first color I'd seen since the fog had arrived. And then the batteries died in the flashlight. Now I'm completely alone in the dark. As I stood there, blinking in the utter blackness that surrounded me and pressed in from all sides, something began tapping on the living room window. As if in response, the colorless people began tapping on every window in the house. The sound was maddening, completely in unison and getting louder and more frequent as each second crept past. And I've been listening to them ever since. All of them. Just tapping on the windows. The sound never leaves, never stops, never pauses, listening to that endless noise. I just know it's tearing my mental state in half. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I just heard a window break. I pray to God it isn't the wolf.